Chapter 2. The Bicycle. When I was 14, my mother took up two new hobbies, riding a bicycle and playing piano. The piano I didn't mind, but the bicycle drove me crazy. It was a huge old clunker, blue with white trim, with big fat tires, huge fenders, and a battery-powered horn built into the middle of the frame with a button you pushed to make it blow. The contraction would be a collector's item now, probably worth about $5,000, but back then it was something my stepfather found on the street in Brooklyn and hauled home a few months before he died. I don't know whether it was his decision to pull out or not, but I think not. He was 72 when he died, trim, strong, easygoing, seemingly infallible, and though he was my stepfather, I always thought of him as Daddy. He was a quiet, soft-spoken man who wore old-timey clothes, fedoras, button-down wool coats, suspenders, and dressed neatly at all times, regardless of how dirty his work made him. He did everything slowly and carefully, but beneath his tractor-like slowness and outward gentleness was a crossbreed of quiet Indian and country black man, sure-footed, hard, bold, and quick. He took no guff and gave none. He married my mother, a white Jewish woman, when she had 8 mixed-race black children, me being the youngest at less than a year old. They added 4 more children to make it an even 12, and he cared for all of us as if he were his own. "I got enough for a baseball team," he joked. One day he was there, the next a stroke, and he was gone. I virtually dropped out of high school after he died, failing every class. I spent the year going to movies on 42nd Street in Times Square with my friends. "James is going through his revolution," my siblings snickered. Still, my sisters were concerned, my older brothers angry. I ignored them. Me and my hanging out boys were into the movies, Superfly, Shaft, and Reefer, which we smoked in as much quantity as possible. I snatched purses, I shoplifted, I even robbed a petty drug dealer once. And then, in the afternoons, coming home after a day of cutting school, smoking reefer, waving razors, and riding the subway, I would see my mother pedaling her blue bicycle. She would ride in slow motion across our street, Murdoch Avenue in the St. Albans section of Queens, the only white person in sight, as cars swerved around her and black motorists gawked at the strange middle-aged white lady riding her ancient bicycle. It was her way of grieving, though I didn't know it then. Hunter Jordan, my stepfather, was dead. Andrew McBride, my biological father, had died while she was pregnant with me 14 years earlier. It was clear that Mommy was no longer interested in getting married again, despite the efforts of a couple of local preachers who were all Cadillacs and smiles and knew that she, and thus we, were broke. At 51, she was still slender and pretty, with curly black hair, dark eyes, a large nose, a sparkling smile, and a bow-legged walk you could see a mile off. We used to call that Mommy's mad walk, and if she was doing it in your direction, all hell was gonna break loose. I'd seen her go up to some pretty tough dudes and shake her fist in their faces when she was angry, but that was before Daddy died. Now she seemed intent on playing the piano, dodging bill collectors, forcing us into college through sheer willpower, and riding her bicycle all over Queens. She refused to learn how to drive. Daddy's old car sat out front for weeks, parked at the curb, silent, clean, polished. Every day she rode her bike right past it, ignoring it. The image of her riding that bicycle typified her whole existence to me, her oddness, her complete non-awareness of what the world thought of her, a nonchalance in the face of what I perceived to be imminent danger from blacks and whites who disliked her for being a white person in a black world. She saw none of it. She rode so slowly that if you looked at her from a distance, it seemed as if she weren't moving, the image frozen, painted against the spring sky, a middle-aged white woman on an antique bicycle with black kids zipping past her on Stingray bikes and skateboards, popping wheelies and throwing firecrackers that burst all around her. She ignored it all. She wore a flower print dress and black loafers, her head swiveling back and forth as she rode shakily past the triangle curve where I played stickball with my friends, up Lewiston Avenue, down the hill on Mayville Street where a lovely kid named Roger got killed in a car accident, back up the hill on Murdoch, over the driveway curb, and to the front of our house. She would stop, teetering shakily, catching herself just before the bike collapsed on the sidewalk. "Whew," she'd say, while my siblings, camped on the stoop of our house to keep an eye on her, shook their heads. My sister Dottie would say, "I sure wish you wouldn't ride that bike, Ma." And I silently agreed, because I didn't want my friends seeing my white mother out there riding a bicycle. She was already white, that was bad enough, but to go out and berate me, it was a gray coat with a fur collar that literally been chewed up by somebody. Mommy dusted it off with a whisk broom, set out 8 or 9 bowls, poured oatmeal in each, left instructions for the eldest to feed the rest, then ran a comb through my hair. The sensation was like a tractor pulling my curls off. "Come on," she said, "I'll walk you to the bus stop." Surprise reward. Me and Mommy alone. It was the first time I remember ever being alone with my mother. It became the high point of my day, a memory so sweet it is burned into my mind like a tattoo. Mommy walking me to the bus stop, and every afternoon picking me up, standing on the corner of New Mexico and 114th Road, clad in a brown coat, her black hair tied in a colorful scarf, watching with the rest of the parents as the yellow school bus swung around the corner and came to a stop with a hiss of air brakes. Gradually, as the weeks passed and the terror of going to school subsided, I began to notice something about my mother, that she looked nothing like the other kids' mothers. In fact, she looked more like my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Alexander, who was white. Peering out the window as the bus rounded the corner and the front doors flew open, I noticed that Mommy stood apart from the other mothers, rarely speaking to them. She stood behind them, waiting calmly, hands in her coat pockets, watching intently through the bus windows to see where I was, then smiling and waving as I yelled my greeting to her through the window. She'd quickly grasp my hand as I stepped off the bus, ignoring the stares of the black women as she whisked me away. One afternoon, as we walked home from the bus stop, I asked Mommy why she didn't look like the other kids' mothers. "Because I'm not them," she said. "Who are you?" I asked. "I'm your mother." "Then why don't you look like Rodney's mother or Pete's mother? How come you don't look like me?" She sighed and shrugged. She'd obviously been down this road many times. "I do look like you. I'm your mother. You ask too many questions. Educate your mind. School is important. Forget Rodney and Pete. Forget their mothers. You remember school. Forget everything else. Who cares about Rodney and Pete? When they go one way, you go the other way. You understand? When they go one way, you go the other way. You hear me?" "Yes." "I know what I'm talking about. Don't follow none of them around. You stick to your brothers and sisters, that's it. Don't tell nobody your business neither." End of discussion. A couple of weeks later, the bus dropped me off and Mommy was not there. I panicked. Somewhere in the back of my mind was the memory of her warning me, "You're going to have to learn to walk home by yourself." But that memory blinked like a distant fog light in a stormy sea, and it drowned in my panic. I was lost. My house was 2 blocks away, but it might as well have been 10 miles because I had no idea where it was. I stood on the corner and bit back my tears. The other parents regarded me sympathetically and asked my address, but I was afraid to tell them. In my mind was Mommy's warning, drilled into all 12 of us children from the time we could walk: never, ever, ever tell your business to nobody. And I shook my head, no, I don't know my address. They departed one by one until a sole figure remained, a black father who stood in front of me with his son saying, "Don't worry, your mother is coming soon." I ignored him. He was blocking my view, the tears clouding my vision as I tried to peer behind him, looking down the block to see if that familiar brown coat and white face would appear in the distance. It didn't. In fact, there wasn't anyone coming at all, except a bunch of kids, and they certainly didn't look like Mommy. They were a motley crew of girls and boys, ragged with wild hairdos and unkempt jackets, hooting and making noise, and only when they were almost upon me did I recognize the faces of my elder siblings and my little sister Kathy, who trailed behind them. I ran into their arms and collapsed in tears as they gathered around me, laughing.